Have you ever met someone who seems to believe their personal opinion is legally binding? Someone who thinks that because they hold a trivial position of power, they can dictate the lives of everyone around them? I have. Her name was Karen, and she was the self-appointed queen of our otherwise peaceful Lakeside Homeowners Association. For years, I'd managed to avoid her, content to live out my retirement in the house my late wife and I had built, a place meant for quiet mornings and family memories. All I wanted was to enjoy my coffee on the porch and teach my grandkids, Leo and Maya, how to cast a line from the small dock at the edge of our own property. That simple, pure joy was apparently a violation of Karen's grand vision for the neighborhood. She decided, one sweltering Saturday afternoon, that the sight of two children fishing was an offense to the community's aesthetic. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that my quiet retirement came after 35 years as a senior paralegal specializing in land use, riparian rights, and municipal law. I had forgotten more about property law than she had ever learned in her life of gossiping over fence posts. She picked a fight she was uniquely, spectacularly unequipped to win. Have you ever had to deal with a bully who is so confident in their ignorance? It's a frustrating experience, but let me tell you, when you have the facts on your side, it can also be incredibly satisfying. This is the story of how a quiet grandfather and two little fishing rods brought down a petty tyrant with the one thing she couldn't argue with: the law. The first real confrontation happened a week after Karen had made a few passive-aggressive comments while power-walking past my property line. This time, she wasn't just passing by. My grandkids, Leo, who was 10, and Maya, who was 8, were on our dock, proudly showing me the small sunfish they just caught and released. Their laughter echoed across the water. That sound, apparently, was Karen's battle cry. She marched down her perfectly manicured lawn and stopped at the edge of my property, hands on her hips, her face a mask of indignation. "This is completely unacceptable," she announced, her voice carrying an authority she didn't possess. I walked over, keeping my tone gentle. "Karen, what seems to be the problem?" "The kids are just having a bit of fun," she scoffed, a truly theatrical sound. "The HOA covenants are very clear about recreational nuisances. This is an eyesore. Those bobbers are garish, and their childish shouting is disturbing the peace." I could smell the wine on her breath, even from 10 feet away. It was barely 3 p.m. "Karen," I said, still calm, "they're on my private property, fishing from my private dock. The HOA has no jurisdiction over what we do here." She took a step onto my lawn, a trespass I noted but chose to ignore for the moment. "I'm the head of the Architectural Review and Community Standards Committee. Everything in this community is my jurisdiction. Your dock is an improvement, and its use is subject to board approval. Fishing is not an approved use." It was such a breathtakingly absurd interpretation of the rules that I almost laughed. Instead, I tried reason one last time. "That's not how any of this works. We're not bothering anyone. I'd appreciate it if you'd let my grandkids enjoy their afternoon." She just sneered. "You'll be hearing from the board. This is your only warning." She turned and stomped back to her house, leaving two confused and slightly scared children in her wake. The gauntlet had been thrown. Just as she promised, a letter arrived 3 days later. It was printed on fancy HOA letterhead, full of puffed-up legal jargon that was mostly misspelled and entirely misused. It was a formal cease and desist order demanding an immediate halt to all unauthorized piscatorial activities on my property. It was signed by Karen, with her title chairwoman, ERCSC, typed in a grandiose font underneath. The letter threatened fines, liens against my property, and further legal action. This was her escalation. For a normal person, it would have been intimidating. For me, it was a declaration of war, and she had just handed me my marching orders. The frustration I felt began to solidify into cold, methodical resolve. I went down to my study, a room filled with books she would never understand. I didn't reach for a phone to call a lawyer. I was the guy the lawyers called. I pulled my original deed from the file cabinet, the one clearly stating my property line extended 10 feet into the lake bed itself. I pulled out the original subdivision plat maps from 1978, which designated the lake as a multi-use waterway accessible to all deeded property owners. Then came the real ammunition. I logged into my old LexisNexis account, a professional luxury I'd kept in retirement. I cross-referenced state conservation laws with local ordinances and, finally, the HOA's own governing documents. And there it was, the aha moment. Not only did the HOA covenants explicitly defer to state and federal law regarding waterway usage, but a specific state statute, Title 29, Section 401, made it a misdemeanor to unreasonably impede or harass a lawfully licensed individual engaged in fishing or hunting. It was a statute designed to stop protesters from interfering with hunters, but its language was broad and beautiful. I printed everything: the deed, the maps, the HOA bylaws, and Title 29. My quiet, peaceful afternoon of research had just handed me a nuclear option. The trap began to form in my mind, piece by perfect piece. The strategy that bloomed in my mind was not about anger or revenge, at least not in the petty sense. It was about education, delivered publicly and undeniably. A nasty legal battle would be expensive, time-consuming, and would only entrench the battle lines in the neighborhood. Karen wanted to rule through bluster and intimidation. I would defeat her with quiet, unassailable facts. The plan had to be elegant. It required a stage, an audience, and an arbiter whose authority she could not question. First, I made sure both Leo and Maya had their youth fishing licenses. In our state, they weren't strictly required for their age, but possessing them made them lawfully licensed individuals, a key phrase from Title 29. I had them laminated and told the kids to think of them as their official fishing agent badges, which they loved. Second, I made a phone call. It wasn't to a lawyer, but to an old friend named Mark Jennings. Mark and I had testified on the same side of a major wetlands zoning case a decade ago. He was now the regional supervisor for the State Department of Fish and Wildlife. I explained the situation, not asking for a favor, but for a professional opinion and a point of clarification on the statute. I told him I planned to take my grandkids fishing the following Saturday around 11 a.m. and that I had a strong suspicion my neighbor would try to interfere. Mark listened patiently. "Frank," he said, his voice firm, "that statute is crystal clear. An HOA covenant cannot supersede state law. Her interfering would be a textbook violation. I think one of my game wardens has a patrol route in that area. I'll make sure he's properly briefed on the situation and swings by your lake around that time, just to ensure all regulations are being followed." I smiled. The final piece of the trap was in place. He was sending a game warden, a state officer, to observe. The beauty of it was its plausible deniability. I hadn't asked for an ambush. I had simply made an inquiry to a state agency. The rest was up to Karen. My deliberate, quiet response to her cease and desist letter clearly rattled Karen. She expected a fight, an angry phone call, a retreat. She got silence. And in that silence, her arrogance grew like algae in a stagnant pond. She interpreted my lack of immediate action as submission. She began her victory lap around the neighborhood, telling anyone who would listen that she had finally put that stubborn old man in his place. According to gossip relayed to me by a sympathetic neighbor, Karen claimed I had backed down and that she had saved the community from turning into a fish camp. Her overconfidence was a critical part of my plan. She was, in effect, building the audience for me. To cement her victory, she announced a community lakeside meeting for the upcoming Saturday at 10:45 a.m. The stated purpose was to discuss new proposals for aesthetic maintenance of the common shoreline. The location she chose was the small patch of common green space directly adjacent to my property, offering a perfect, unobstructed view of my dock. She was staging her own triumph, intending to use my supposed defeat as a centerpiece for her lecture on compliance. She was so blinded by her ego that she couldn't see the beautiful, intricate web she was weaving for herself. She was the spider and the fly, all at once. I felt a grim satisfaction as I read the email announcement. She was creating the perfect stage, inviting the audience, and setting the exact time. All I had to do was show up with my grandkids and our fishing rods. She thought she was building a throne, but she was actually just building a scaffold. Her hubris was my greatest ally, and it was performing its duty flawlessly. The morning of the confrontation arrived, bright and clear. A perfect day for fishing. I made pancakes for Leo and Maya, who were buzzing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I had explained to them that a woman might be a little grumpy today, but that we had every right to be there, and that a man in a uniform, a kind of late policeman, might stop by to say hello. "Are we going to be in trouble?" Maya asked, her eyes wide. "Absolutely not," I said, handing her the laminated fishing license. "You are an official agent of fun. No one can stop that." That seemed to satisfy them. Around 10:30 a.m., we gathered our gear, 2 small Zebco rods, a bucket of worms, and a small cooler with juice boxes. We walked calmly out the back door and down the gentle slope of our lawn to the dock. As predicted, Karen's meeting was already underway on the adjacent common area. About a dozen neighbors were gathered, some looking interested, others just being polite. Karen stood before them, a clipboard in hand, in the middle of a sentence about lawn ornamentation. She saw us. A slow, triumphant smirk spread across her face. She paused her speech dramatically, letting the silence hang in the air as all heads turned towards us. I could feel their eyes on us as I helped Leo bait his hook and showed Maya how to check the drag on her reel. We were ignoring her, and it was driving her mad. The tension was a palpable thing, a heavy blanket in the humid summer air. This was the moment. She had her audience. She had her manufactured outrage. And she was walking right into the spotlight I had so carefully prepared for her. Karen let us get the kids' lines in the water before she made her move. It was all part of the performance. She wanted to demonstrate to her audience not just our defiance, but her power to quell it. "Excuse me, everyone," she said to the assembled neighbors, her voice dripping with false patience. "It appears we have a live demonstration of what I've been talking about." A flagrant disregard for our community standards, she marched over to the edge of my property, her 2 chief sycophants trailing behind her like pilot fish. "Frank," she called out, her voice now hard as steel. "I thought I made myself perfectly clear. I have a cease and desist order that explicitly forbids this activity." The kids looked at me, their little faces filled with concern. I gave them a reassuring wink and turned to face her. I kept my voice level and conversational, which only seemed to fuel her fire. "Hello, Karen. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? As I told you before, this is my private property, and we're not in violation of any rules that actually apply to us." Her face flushed a deep red. "I am the authority here. You are creating a nuisance and violating a direct order from the HOA board. Your private property argument is irrelevant." She took another step onto my lawn, waving her clipboard. "This is your final warning. Pull those lines out of the water now, or I will begin fining you $500 per day and have my husband remove this illegal dock tomorrow morning." The threat was so over the top, so absurdly unenforceable. It was perfect. The neighbors were murmuring now, the drama escalating. Karen swelled with importance, believing she had me cornered. She raised her voice to a near shout for her grand finale. "This behavior ends today." Right at that precise moment, as Karen's proclamation hung in the air, a dark green state-issued truck with the official fish and wildlife insignia on the door pulled quietly to a stop on the street behind the gathering. A man in a crisp khaki uniform and a Smokey Bear hat stepped out. He was tall, calm, and radiated an aura of no-nonsense authority that made Karen's self-importance look like a child's costume. A hush fell over the crowd of neighbors. Karen's eyes widened, and a flicker of confusion crossed her face, but it was immediately replaced by a look of vindicated triumph. She truly believed he was her cavalry. She thought the universe had sent this officer to validate her crusade. "Finally," she exclaimed, turning to the approaching game warden. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. I'm Karen Miller, head of the Community Standards Committee. This man," she said, jabbing a finger dramatically toward me, "is refusing to comply with our community bylaws and is conducting unauthorized activities on the lakefront." The warden, who I knew was Mark's best man, Warden Davies, slowly surveyed the scene. He looked at my grandkids with their little rods, then at me, then at the sputtering Karen. He gave me a brief, almost imperceptible nod. He walked past Karen as if she were a piece of lawn furniture and stopped a respectful distance from me. "Good morning, sir," he said, his voice calm and professional. "Warden Davies, State Fish and Wildlife. Just doing a routine check. Do these young anglers have their licenses?" I smiled. "Yes, officer. Right here." I produced the laminated cards. He inspected them with mock seriousness. "Everything looks perfectly in order here. Looks like a good day for sunfish." The tables had not just turned. They had been flipped over and set on fire. Warden Davies handed the licenses back to me with a polite nod. Then he turned his full attention to Karen. Her smug expression had melted into one of utter bewilderment. "Ma'am," the warden began, his tone shifting from friendly to formal. "Were you attempting to prevent these individuals from fishing?" Karen stammered, "Yes. He is violating our HOA rules. It's a nuisance." The warden's face remained impassive. "I see. Are you aware of State Statute Title 29, Section 401? Her blank stare was all the answer he needed. "That statute," he continued, his voice now carrying across the silent crowd, "makes it a Class C misdemeanor to intentionally obstruct or impede the lawful participation of any individual in the act of fishing. These children are on private property with the owner's permission and are properly licensed. The lake itself is a state-managed waterway. Your HOA bylaws have zero jurisdiction over this activity. In fact, your cease and desist order and your current actions could be interpreted as a direct violation of that statute." He let the words hang in the air. You could hear a pin drop. Karen's face went through a rapid series of colors, from red to pale white. But the covenants," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Ma'am," Warden Davies said, his patience clearly wearing thin, "a neighborhood covenant cannot nullify state law. If it could, you could vote to make robbery legal on your street. That's not how it works." He then looked at her clipboard. "Threatening to levy fines for a lawful activity and to remove private property. That moves this from a simple disagreement into the realm of potential civil harassment. I would strongly advise you to cease this course of action immediately." Her authority, her power, her entire public persona evaporated in that single public dressing down. Her supporters began to discreetly shuffle away, suddenly very interested in the dandelions at their feet. Karen stood alone, exposed and humiliated. The aftermath was devastatingly quiet. Warden Davies gave Karen one last, long look, then tipped his hat to me and the kids. "Enjoy your day, sir." "Kids, good luck." With that, he turned, walked back to his truck, and drove away, leaving a crater where Karen's authority used to be. She stood frozen for a moment, her face a crumpled mess of rage and shame. Without another word, she turned and practically ran back to her house, the screen door slamming shut behind her. The remaining neighbors avoided my gaze, not out of hostility, but out of embarrassment for having been part of her audience. The community lakeside meeting was, for all intents and purposes, over. Within a week, an email was sent out from the HOA board announcing that Karen had resigned from her position as chairwoman of the Architectural Review and Community Standards Committee. Citing personal reasons, the power vacuum was filled by a reasonable woman who immediately clarified that the board's purview was limited to common areas and external home modifications only. The broader impact was palpable. A quiet but profound shift occurred in the neighborhood. People became a little friendlier, a little less worried about petty infractions. The fear of an arbitrary ruling from an ignorant tyrant was gone. My victory wasn't just about my right to fish. It was about restoring a sense of reason and fairness to the community. I taught my grandkids a lesson that day far more valuable than how to bait a hook. I taught them that you don't fight bullies with fists or insults, but with knowledge and quiet confidence. Bullies like Karen thrive on the ignorance and fear of others. Their power is an illusion, and the moment you shine the bright, unwavering light of fact upon them, they crumble into dust. So what's the moral of the story? Know your rights, stand your ground, and never, ever underestimate a quiet old man with a good library and a friend in the right place. Have you ever won a fight without raising your voice? It's a victory that tastes sweetest of all.